On the eve of Pekka destroying the Little Wargame campaign in 27 minutes and 27 seconds, I felt both elated and a bit surprised. After all, Pekka had just beaten in half an hour something that it might have unironically taken me 100 hours to create, and I can't take sole credit for the campaign. There were people such as Hobo and Ziantaj and Zhao, who either through benefit of testing, or by reorganizing the map a little bit, or by making the map look nicer, which is a skill I certainly didn't have at the time, and still don't have now. All these people made the maps look nicer, more crisp, more concise, added in their own little Easter eggs, but the fundamental story and the influences behind it were all on me. I was the primary person who made this, and in fact, for those other people, kudos to them for helping, and they certainly made it look much better. In fact, of the 4 campaign maps, Campaign 1, Campaign 2, Campaign 3, and Placeholder Map 4, Placeholder Map 4 is what the maps all tended to look like when I was done with them. A very mechanically built map, but not necessarily flavorful, didn't have the most interesting textures, wasn't graphically gorgeous to look at. It would just serve the base mechanical need of filtering the player through the plot and through the mission. So I am not impugning the honor or the time or investment of all of those people, and certainly could not have been done without all of them. But this is going to get into the Little Wargame campaign because, frankly, the time for the old Little Wargame campaign is nearing its end. It had its zenith, and it was still excellent then, and it's probably still excellent now. But 4 maps doesn't serve the purpose for a post-version 4.3, post-AA4 inclusion world that Little Wargame currently exists within. There needs to be a new campaign. There needs to be a campaign that brings in and shows the new units, needs to introduce more factions, needs an entirely different story, an entirely different vibe. And so I thought, if that's it for the old campaign, why not mark off Pekka's speedrun by something of a farewell, by just laying bare all the secrets of everything that's going on in the Little Wargame campaign that was created by myself. What are the things that are hinted at, but don't necessarily aren't explicitly mentioned? What are the influences for so doing? What's actually going on behind the scenes? So here's the easiest way to think about the Little Wargame campaign. I think of it as, you might want to call it the Domicles Chronicle. And the reason I want to call it the Domicles Chronicle is that the unnamed paladin that you manage throughout the entire story is actually named Damocles. So in the pre-work to the first mission, Damocles is a royal paladin. Like, he is someone who serves at the behest of an unnamed king or lord or someone who is the ruler of his current domain, right? And much like something akin to Fable 3, there is this usurper king, this usurper individual named Fabius. Fabius is someone who seems to have curried favor from nowhere and found a lot of dissidents who then use their ability to overcome they are the revolutionaries, and they overcome the loyalist faction, or the treasonous, if you want, depending on who you're interacting with here. But to the paladin, to Damocles, the Fabius is this overcoming, usurping individual. And that's why when you look at the text for Campaign Mission 1, it says, imprisoned, the usurper Fabius has contained you to Ren Isle. So here's a couple of things. Why is the individual named Damocles? Well, the paladin's name is never given because I thought that if I explained that the hero's name was Damocles, it would be a bit too on the nose because it would give away too much of what the plot is. For those of you who don't know, there is a very famous story that is told about it's the myth of Damocles, basically. There are a number of different interpretations you can have for it, but it tends to go as follows. There is a king named Dionysius, as in, like, the god of wine, etc. It's not actually the Greek god of wine and parties and revelry and, like, drunken stupor and things of that nature, but it's the same name. And there's an individual named Damocles who is not a courtier, but one of the members of the court. Someone who is a sycophant. He is a yes man. He says, yes, sir. Oh, you have the most excellent everything. Oh, your life is perfect. Because Dionysius seems to have women and food and land and parties and all the alcohol and, like, riches. And Dionysius has everything that seemingly a mortal individual would want. And so, Domicles, this yes man, is like, yes, you have the greatest of everything. Oh, yes, everything you have is like, indeed, you are without peer in the realm. Everything is wonderful. And Dionysius there's a younger and an older, doesn't matter for this story, just looks at Damocles and says, "You think I have everything, huh? Do you want to try this?" And of course, Domicles is like, "Of course I want to try this. This is amazing. You have everything. I was telling you how great your life is. Obviously, I'm partially jealous of your life. I want the things that you have. But here's what's interesting." A little bit of time goes by. Damocles, after realizing he has all of these things, like, women and wine and celebration and riches beyond his normal ken, like, he also realizes that there is a tremendous responsibility literally hanging over his head. Suspended by a single hair, sometimes a horsehair, is a sword over the throne of Damocles, of the throne of what is properly Dionysius' throne, threatening to go down and impale and destroy Damocles. And so there are many ways that this story has been interpreted over time. It's heavy as the crown that, heavy as the head that wears the crown. The idea that there is heavy responsibility and leadership that is that is part of the benefit, but also the curse of being in this position of authority. Yes, you get all these benefits, but it's not even necessarily worth the weight of responsibility. It can be a metaphor for what all the stress that leadership causes on an individual. It can also be seen as a way of saying, like, remain in your station. You don't know what other people have or what they're going through. That's one way that you can certainly take it. Another interpretation could be maybe the ruler has to be more in line and in keeping with the people around them and seem more human, because this story could also have been a critique of Julius Caesar, but we're not going to get into that. The point is, the paladin's name here would be Damocles, to reference that overall, Fabius is doing something very akin to Fable 3. Fabius sees in the background, away from the paladin's eyes, there are invaders that are coming from across the sea. And much like the Tau of Warhammer 40k, they're fleeing something that is way, way worse than what they're bringing to the continent, or what they're bringing to local civilization. These invaders are fleeing desperately, despite being superior in arms, superior in technology, and superior in tactics. They're fleeing. The rebel faction seems to have been, the dissidents have been gathered by Fabius because border towns have been sacked, much like the Confederacy in StarCraft 1's campaign. And, these border towns are getting sacked and harassed, and they're not seeing any of the help from the existing unnamed king, existing unnamed structure that the paladin Damocles serves. So Damocles, by omission, or definitely not by commission, but by accidental omission, is serving a ruler that doesn't appear to solve the problems of invasion, doesn't seem to solve the problems of dissidents in the realm, doesn't seem to solve the needs of the people. And this doesn't work. This isn't something that the paladin ever fully understands. But Fabius does understand it. And this is part of what the journal entries reveal. Fabius, he has his own story that we're going to get into. But Fabius realizes that this isn't all working, and this is not allowed to stand. This cannot continue. And so he decides that he is going to do what is against his own moral code, but to the benefit of the society at large that he is, faithful towards, and say the best honor, the most praise, the best way I can use my skills to defend what is important to me is to replace those that stop me from defending what is important to me. I know what path must be taken. They are not willing to. I will gather people who understand that and support my claim, and we will do this. Fast forward to the present. There's more to go into, but fast forward to the present. Fabius throws the loyalist faction, those that weren't just outright defeated after their castles were, the keep was taken over that Fabius now resides in. Many of the armies are now spread out and have been subsumed or taken over entirely. And the loyalist faction, Fabius being honorable, doesn't kill all of the people that he could. It's not because he doesn't want to create a martyr. He genuinely is doing this out of the goodwill that he feels and what he feels is necessary for his equivalent of the realm, of his country, of his countrymen. So he takes people and he throws them as best as can be able in various isolated pockets of the realm, such as Ren Isle. Ren Isle is where Campaign 1 starts. The Paladin Domicles is there, and it is a testament to the will of Domicles that Domicles is somebody who doesn't lose faith, doesn't lose heart. That is something that I thought, I didn't consciously put in, but it is an idea that I have, which is, you don't have to like this idea, right? There is an idea called the great man hypothesis. You can call it great woman, great person, I don't care. This is going to attract a lot of ire. But the general idea, one of the general ideas, because this is a very dangerous territory, one of the broad ideas of the great man hypothesis is that history didn't have to go this way. And in fact, it's not the case that if you just make enough people, eventually you get Alexander the Great. We could have gone our whole history without an Alexander the Great. Things in history are propelled forward by great men. That's why the hypothesis is called the great man hypothesis. The idea is that people who are the movers and changers of the world, yes, some of them, they're in the right spot at the right time, but they had to be the person who was there at the right place at the right time. Many other people were also there at the right place at the right time, and they just didn't have the force of figure and the ability to bend history to their will. And something that is compelling about that, I'm not saying ignore whether you agree with that or not. Something that's compelling about that is that I thought the Paladin Damocles is this kind of person who he feels he's been wrong. His primary duty is to the realm. And so he will force this to be made correct. He will not let this injustice stand. If you look at Ren Isle, all of the other individuals that are part of your team that you can get out of the cages, out of the cells, they're all demoralized. They all say things that indicate that they're hopeless, they have no drive, no passion, no ability. We already have some hints that Domicles is a bit different. He's forged out this path in the back of the thing. He's got a false wall that he can break through to escape. He goes and he gets all of his items. He starts freeing everybody in there, and he's got an escape plan to get out. But that's only one area that's happening. Something that I wanted to emphasize throughout this campaign is that Damocles and Fabius, Fabius was originally named Dionysius for the same reason. I thought that would be inappropriate and give away too much. So I settled for something that was more, generically Roman-esque or Greek-esque. Here's the thing. Their story is actually one of history repeating itself. They just don't realize it yet. And there are some subtle nuances, but it nevertheless is in fact repeating. So of the 3 journal entries, on the surface level, we have Damocles freeing everyone he can, getting everyone out. Some of the guards are yelling something about, but hell if I know, or something like that. Something about some kind of beast or figure or entity that seems to have bothered them. Something is going wrong in the prison, but we never actually interface with it directly. Here's what's interesting. While Domicles is killing everything and moving out, there are 3 journal entries that you can find on Ren Isle. We see a couple of things. There is a cell door that, unlike all of the other cell doors, most cell doors, you kill them, and there's just a path that goes nowhere. It's just here's the cell, and the individual is trapped in it. Damocles made a false wall to try and escape. There is one other cell door that, when you break into it, has a false wall in it. It doesn't lead to escape, but it does have a journal entry in it. And this is an idea that I got from V for Vendetta. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil that because that is a classic. You have got to watch that if you have not already watched it. But the idea was, much like, you'll know the scene if you've watched V for Vendetta. There's a scene in which the individual is in a dire prison-like circumstance, and they receive hidden messages. So this is where I thought, I like the idea of there being something for the player to do that is not mechanically difficult, but that rewards them for exploration. I value rewarding players in proportion to the effort that they put inside of the game. So if you just want to there's nothing against speedrunning because that also requires that you know literally everything about the mod. Or everything relevant about the mod. But I mean, if you're just I don't care what's the point of this mission, go from A to B, okay, I'm just going to go from A to B. You can do that, but you'll miss some journal notes. Like this first journal note indicates a couple of things. One, that it's a hidden message on a wall, which is an homage to V for Vendetta, and it references that there's something going on deeper here on Ren Isle. Something is amiss. Something is not quite right. And you get the idea that actually, if you pay attention, there is someone else who is on Ren Isle who made an escape. And that person, not in the same context, not in the same way, was actually Fabius. So the cell door that you break open that has that journal entry in it that you can read, that's Fabius's journal. That's Fabius's cell. He just isn't there anymore because, this is a journal entry that's tucked away in the side. If you look for the other journal entries, down in the barracks room, again, hidden in the wall, there is a journal entry. If you look outside, if you go all the way looping around outside to the outskirts of Ren Isle, you see a journal entry there. What's interesting about all of these is that we get Fabius's perspective from a number of different directions. Fabius's journal entries on Ren Isle indicate a couple of things. One, there was some kind of beast, some kind of thing that he needed a whole group of soldiers and entities to take out, but that unfortunately they only just barely managed to take out, and also unfortunately it seems like it was alone, which it shouldn't have been, and it was weak, which it shouldn't have been, which is threatening because this weak, alone thing that normally has allies that are stronger than it is just the doom of an entire platoon of really well-trained units and soldiers and individuals. We also see the Fabius, who was kind of, at one point trapped inside of that area, and so you get the idea that Fabius went back at some point. When he's writing these journal entries, he's visiting Ren Isle again after he has already escaped, and he is like paying homage to his own cell, where he escaped from, whatever he was going on in the past, to write these entries, and he left them, like tucked into a wall here, tucked into the back of a cell over here, and then just a loose, sheaf of a book located outside. So we get the idea that Fabius was here, he was trapped on Ren Isle, he escaped Ren Isle. At some later point, he and a group of his men encountered something that was absolutely terrifying, and they tried to send it to Ren Isle. Now, this also leads into, for instance, the wolves that are on Ren Isle in Campaign 1. Why are there wolves that are trapped in the bottom area that whimper? Well, first thing is, with the idea that some beast has been trapped on the same island that you're on, I didn't know what the feeling of the game was to be at that time. I was thinking perhaps something of a horror bend, but I also thought that was a good way to not so subtly indicate the presence of werewolves in the game. Werewolves, as we'll see in Mission 2, I envisioned as something that was worked on by the priests of the invading nation. That's what the invaders are leaving, is mage beast human hybridization, and just the dark continent of Hunter x Hunter levels of no, don't engage that, run away. The whole idea of the horror sub-theme of Mission 1 with Fabius and his men tracking down this thing and then finding out that it's way too strong for what it is, but it's actually not strong enough and it's by itself. I got from the Siratako adventure of Daniel Romar's, what is it called? Hero Forever? Hero Core. Daniel Romar is an indie games developer who made an excellent shooting game called Hero Core. I encourage you to try it. But he also made the game EG, and in the game EG there is a reference called Siratako, which refers to an Annihilator exoskeleton, this big, giant war machine that seemingly just went absolutely insane. And it was so powerful, it started by itself, despite being damaged repeatedly, just wrecking absolutely everything on board an entire ship, flying starship. And no one could deal with it, and even those that did deal with it, it took way too many losses, and eventually it was just contained. It wasn't even properly defeated. And so the Beast of Ren Isle is an homage to the Annihilator from Siratako. But it also feeds into what happens in Mission 2. And so you find out that overall that's what there is to talk about in Mission 1. you're Damocles, but you're mirroring the same imprisonment that Fabius had there once upon a time. And if you read around, you can see that this is why wolves are also contained on Ren Isle. There's some question as to what actually makes them become werewolves, makes them become a threat. And no one knows the answer. So Ren Isle is an island, yes, but it's not an island prison for just political dissidents. It's also an island for things that we don't know what's going on, but we can't risk anything escaping this. And so, of course, naturally, the player as Damocles gets all their forces, does whatever they have to go get to the airship. They flee, and they move on to mission number 2. When I finished mission number 2, I thought when I finished mission number 1, I thought I had answered a couple of questions, but because of the nature of the creative process, answering those questions actually brought up even more interesting questions, such as, we've just escaped from the prison, and you're a person who's just been imprisoned and had to break out. And, Damocles, this paladin, is a leader of these people. These people look up to him, like he busted them all out of prison, and they have the same loyalty to the former usurped king or leader or entity that he did, but they're now without a home, and they're criminals, and they have no idea what to do next. So they end up, though, the airship keeps moving until eventually, and coincidentally, it manages to stop and get to a point where it's just so busted it can't work anymore. It gets to a place called the Waterwoods. I call this place the Waterwoods because it is a woodland area that has a couple of rivers going through it. But also Waterwood, I currently live in the middle portion of the United States. I've traveled up, down, left, and right all over the United States, but mostly in the central and southeastern areas of the country. And all over the central and southeastern areas of the United States, there are some towns and some areas that are called by names that are just nouns. They're just a couple of nouns of what the thing is. Like, there might be a place that's called Rock Ridge. Well, why is it called Rock Ridge? Well, because the town is actually built on underneath of this rock ridge that's looking over top of it, or at least that was the idea when it was first named, however many years ago. So I thought the Waterwoods would be an excellent name for this area because that's what it is, and that just kind of mirrors the homey, small town-ish, unsettled, but still properly civilized kind of idea that I experienced in those places. The airship breaks down, and you have to start moving on foot. This is a common conceit in other real-time strategy games where you're supposed to go from point A to point B, but you can't quite get there. This is also common in the Fire Emblem series, particularly in Fire Emblem Awakening. It seems to happen every 5th mission, where you want to go from point A to B, but inexplicably there's a battle halfway between A and B. And I just wanted to do that because I think that it wouldn't be. Think of Final Fantasy IX. It wouldn't be an interesting journey if the first portion of the game was, well, you want to escape and then just immediately go back. So you just grab a warp stone, you go back home, and you explain what's going on, and then everything seems to be good. I mean, obviously, that would just fast forward the speed at which we get to the narrative devices, but we haven't gotten the player time to settle down with the mechanics. And so much the same way, I didn't want to go right from Ren Isle and the escape to, congrats, now you have an army, you have reinforcements, go fight Fabius. You need to build it up a little bit. And that is both a teaching device for the player, as much as it is a narrative device to indicate that the paladin is someone who's overcome some struggles and someone that you should relate to. The paladin gets a little bit stronger in each of the missions, Domicles that is. He gets something on the order of between 25 and 50 extra hit points, 1 more armor, and 2 to 3 more damage, or 1 to 3 more damage with each mission. The idea that he is growing and becoming more and more powerful from all of his experiences. You get to the Waterwood. The Waterwood is actually an area that has been set up by the forward scouts of the things from the land that the invaders come from. So the Waterwood is this kind of back area. And if you're familiar with the works of H.P. Lovecraft or any horror writer, really, things that are secretive don't sometimes, in modern trends, they happen in the high seats of political office. They happen in the most open marketed areas, like they are secreted from the world only because you'd have to be a nut or a conspiracy theorist to realize the truth of what they're doing. Like, think the Illuminati. That's how modern conspiracies, how people think of modern conspiracies. But older, pre-modern understandings of conspiracy worked as follows. Somewhere, there are cabals of individuals. There are cabals gathering, trying to determine the dark future that they have alone planned, where their machinations come together and sift through the realities of human lives, impeding and inserting destruction in their entire wake. Like, this is the way that older conspiracies work. Not in broad daylight, it's not daylight horror, it's not at the seat of power. It's somewhere away where all of these individuals are suspicious and probably evil just by nature of the fact that they gather secretly somewhere else to do what business is not even known. I have the influence of Terry Pratchett also to thank for this. Combination of Sword of Truth, Sword of Shannara, all of those things. Or is that Terry Goodkind? I'm going to butcher it either way. No, Pratchett is Discworld. That's right. I mean, Discworld was also a part of this. So we get to the Waterwoods. Your Domicles, and the on-the-face mission is as follows. You're supposed to destroy all of the Mages Guilds. Now, that's only a fault of the Little Wargame editor. You're supposed to not know what you have to do, find the workers in the local sanctuary, build a base, and then realize that the thing you have to do is take out the Mages Guilds because they seem to have something to do with the run of the place. But that's just the fault of the editor. That is not a narrative device. So there are wolves' dens everywhere, which makes sense at first. It makes sense that this area that is off and by itself and alone is overtaken by wolves. But as you get to the sanctuary, you realize all of these units, all of these workers, all of these individuals are trapped inside of these sanctuaries and won't leave for fear of all the wolves that are outside. But there is the idea that something else is amiss. As you battle through the entire mission, you realize up in the middle eastern side, there are cages that have individuals in them. So something or someone, probably the mages that you first saw in the large battle that you must have gone through one way or the other before you get to that point. The mages are in some ways working in concert with these wolves. And they're trapping humans and wolves together in cages, and below them is a werewolf's den. This isn't implication so much as it is as close to an outright statement as I can make without a hovertext thing saying, the mages are making werewolves, as if the just further cementing that the implication from the first mission is in fact reality. And you were supposed to take this as your onus to push through and destroy all of the Mages Guilds. However, there is a series of interesting things happening in the background here. First off, you keep finding these... We're going to go to this. First, you keep finding these journals. These journals, again, the player doesn't know that they're written from Fabius' perspective, but again, Damocles is accidentally following in the footsteps of what's happening here story-wise for Fabius. Fabius, as you learn through as you learn from the town of the middle left, if you go through the sanctuary, you destroy it and you move through, you can find the town of Yoitz or Yoitsu. And you also learn this from other things and other journal entries you discover. Fabius, the writer of the journals, is from Yoitsu. He knows that something is wrong because the people of the town have called for him specifically. They have called for help. He seems to be part of the military structure at this point, and he is being called back to home. And he knows that it's strange that people would call him back home because, as he notes in one of the journal entries, the people here are hardy. To ask for help means something dire must be happening. And something dire is happening. Mages and wolves are overrunning the area in concert with mages, and anyone that isn't outright killed or hides in a sanctuary somewhere is being taken away for experimentation. And so, much to Fabius's horror, if you go through, if you destroy the sanctuary in the middle left portion of the map and go through, you find the town of Yoitsu. But Yoitsu is a bit of a strange place. All the buildings are fine, everything is still erect, but there are no people. There are graves dug, some with children in them, a lot with not in them, and there's no people. all the buildings are destroyed. And so, of course, there's a journal entry that even comments, in case you've missed the implication that this is not how cities get destroyed. Usually, when you look at post-apocalyptic fare, when you look at things like The Stand, or you look at things like what is it called? Chronicle for Leibowitz, I want to say. When you look at these, typically there's been nuclear war. There has been poison. There has been a plague. There has been some supernatural event. It's not right. Like, think of anything you've seen that has like a horror element into it. Like when they go into the amusement park and none of the rides are working and it's broad daylight and there are no people around whatsoever. That's not natural. That's not right. That's not how this is supposed to work, especially since every other building, this is done deliberately, every other building that you encounter, such as the sanctuary, it naturally spawns workers to indicate that they've been hiding here. There are no people in Yoitsu. They're all gone. And so there is even something of a fourth journal note inside of Yoitsu, when now that you know the journal writer is Fabius, it makes sense. Domicles discovers the etching that Fabius made, and I think if they weren't so opposed to one another individually, they would recognize they're in fact the same person in this concept, which is the eulogy is something I'm just remembering offhand. I cannot give your lives back to you so swiftly as they were taken, yet I promise that I will find the vengeance that this land in Yoitsu demands. Fabius is from Yoitsu. That is his hometown. He got to his hometown to discover that everything had been destroyed. All the people were dead and buried or gone or ripped to pieces. And he and his men had to bury the remnant, but all of the buildings were left up. And so, he realizes that something is amiss here. The mages and wolves were there when Fabius got there. He destroyed them because he found out what happened to Yoitsu. That was part of his plan. When he found out that Yoitsu had been destroyed, he went to go see the culprits. He found out that the mages and wolves were going on. That's how he found out about the invaders. That's how he found out about what the invaders are fleeing from. That's when he decided that this cannot be allowed to happen. There are a couple of other things about this. The town of Yoitsu is a spoiler for Spice and Wolf. For those of you who don't know, Spice and Wolf is a manga anime in which a main character called Lawrence Kraft, who is a traveling merchant, finally goes back to a town called Paslow that he's very familiar with. There is a harvest deity named Holo, H-O-L-O, the Wise Wolf, Holo the Wise Wolf. She's been there for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. And finally, she wants to leave the village of Paslow with Lawrence, see the world, all in hopes of going back up to the northern land of Yoitsu, which is her home. Spoiler alert, when she gets to the town of Yoitsu, or she learns to read, upon learning that she knows how to read, Lawrence realizes that Holo knows now Yoitsu has been destroyed by something called the moon-eating bear. All of the old gods, the way that the Japanese, in this story, consider the old gods, giant, almost mythical, Princess Mononoke style, large wolves or speaking animals or things of that nature. Whatever the moon-eating bear was, they were destroyed by it. And Yoitsu is no more. That is the name of an old town that Lawrence only knows because he's a traveling merchant, but it's dead now. There's nothing there. It's just so old that barely anyone even remembers the name anymore. And so the town of Yoitsu, being this destroyed hovel, is just an acknowledgement of what happened in that series. That's where the name came from. That's why the epitaph reads what it does as a eulogy, because it's for things that have already been lost and Fabius cannot get it back. And Domicles isn't from Yoitsu, but he nevertheless knows what this is like. In fact, this is part of why he feels he has to overcome Fabius now. Because look what happened here. Look what happened to these people. Now, of course, Damocles takes the other way of this. He doesn't consider that because he is very He sees Fabius as the things that are a problem in his life, but he doesn't realize that Fabius is not the result, is not the source of all problems in his life. So Fabius represents a problem in that he imprisoned Domicles, but for Domicles, Fabius is the one who is like working with mages and corrupting wolves and doing like that. The narrative implication is that he is not, because once you find out that the journal entries are written by Fabius, it makes no sense that he would turn the wolves with mages against his own people, so they must be their own faction. If that doesn't convince you, notice that the wolves don't appear at all inside of placeholder map 4, inside of the final mission of the campaign. No wolves or werewolves exist. If they did, maybe Fabius would be working together in concert with things like the wizard, like akin to the wizard Trent in the Inheritance trilogy. I'm not quite right on that one. But there's no such indication that they're working together in that way. In fact, the implication is that they're actively not working together, and that Damocles is mistaken. It's a natural mistake, but only one that you realize in hindsight. Fabius would not destroy his own hometown. He would not work with these people. And in fact, in the past, he followed the same path that Damocles did. He wiped these people off of the Waterwoods. He destroyed their influence and moved on entirely. They just, like a plague, came back. Their machinations are a little too severe. And the one final thing I want to talk about is that there is something that was made by, I believe, Hobo. Perhaps it was by Zientage. Above where Yoitsu is located, there is a small outcropping that overlooks a hill that has a quintet of mages sitting on top of it. The mages are surrounding a thing that, if you know Western magical tradition or old Western mythology, however you want to say it, the thing that they're around is not a fairy fort, but like a fairy ring. It is around an area that has wildlife and mushrooms and things like that, with a giant stone in the center of it. So you should get a couple of implications there. One, whatever these mages work for, it is not for a force purely of, it's not for a force of iron and will, let's put it that way. And additionally, they're literally overlooking by a double hill. They're looking over Yoitsu. They've literally overseen what's happened to Yoitsu. I can't make that any clearer at that point. So, with that, we move on to Mission 3. Mission 3 is where things get a little bit more complicated. If Damocles were interested in finding out what was going on, Damocles would realize that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes than they've realized. But there's also this implication, if you look over all the words that Damocles says, that he is becoming more and more ideologically possessed. I didn't go over this in the influences, but note the hover text that Damocles has for the first mission. It says, "Honor is my guide." Honor is my guide is just a barely there retelling of "Honor guide me," which is one of the unit acknowledgement lines said by the Protoss Zealot in StarCraft. It's literally called a zealot, as in religious fervor or cultural fervor. This is a unit that in the age of the Korpulu sector runs up and stabs things with psi blades at melee range until it dies and its soul gets ripped from its body so that it can possibly fight on again as a dragoon. What? And so you get the idea, if I get this connection, Damocles the Paladin is he will not stop. Even if his goal should change, he himself is not going to change what his end result is. And he even says, Fabius had you sunk so low in mission number 2. And in mission number 3, he says something Damocles says a couple of things that are interesting. So, for instance, he finds out that he's under attack by these invader knights. They literally have a different graphical skin for the soldiers. They use the rifleman skin instead of the archers. They have upgrades that he does not have. They have some building textures that are completely foreign to the player. This should indicate that they are another faction. There's something going on here. And then there is the treasonous faction. But the treasonous faction is interesting in its own right because they seem to be spawning injured workers. They have little outcroppings and tents where they're not at full health. Some of their villagers are dying. Some of their workers are just not doing well. Like, they seem to be affected by war and disease and all of these terrible things. And in fact, the invading forces, their rally points naturally move over to contest with the fortified positions of the treasonous faction. Both of them do. It's just that one of them has much better upgrades, so, and doesn't spawn injured units. So you figure out who's going to be winning this overall. If Domicles were a self-reflective person, he would realize that, okay, this is a three-way battle, and I don't even understand who this third faction is. What's going on here? But Domicles doesn't realize that whatsoever. Damocles doesn't say anything except, oh, look, they have a workshop. Let's destroy that and get schematics. Oh, look, they have a forge. Let's destroy that and get schematics. He's very pragmatically focused on wanting to go ahead and do what it is he believes is correct, which is, look, all these people are a nuisance. Wipe them off the face of the earth. Build this as our fortified position, and we'll move on. Because after the events of the Waterwood, you now have enough forces to start building something of an army, and so Damocles decides, you know, we're going to build an army, and then we have to sit here for the winter and wait for the time of sieging. I was very interested in siege warfare, and so the way that campaigns used to run in, I believe, in Europe was as follows. There was a time for war, and there was a time for not. And when there was the time for not, due to usually weather, you don't engage in war. Disease is a very real thing. Logistics are a very real nightmare. You don't want to have to deal with that the entire time. That's too much of a headache. That just creates problems. And so you just take a break. Take some time off under all but the most dire circumstances. And this must be, and that's another implication, these must be dire circumstances if during the pitched winter these forces are still engaging in combat. Something must be wrong. That's the additional implication. Something must be wrong for these forces to be fighting in winter the way that they are. But Damocles doesn't realize that, again, he is following in Fabius's footsteps. Fabius's journal entries indicate that Fabius seems somewhat conflicted. He's got something on his mind. And he eventually realizes, he comes to this exact location where Mission 3 takes place, Campaign 3, and he is there in the windswept snow amidst the mountains, etc. And he realizes that basically we're all in this together. We have to do all of this. Now, what's funny about this and what shows that these are dark parallels of each other is that Damocles' quote is, "The bell tolls, Fabius." The bell tolls is a reference to John Donne's very, very famous line for one of his poems where he says, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." The entire poem, however, is about how, look, all of humanity is connected in some way or fashion. You are connected to your family, and your family is connected to your country. And if you're a European country, that country is connected to the continent of, like, Europe, or to that area of the world, what is colloquially known as Europe. And it says, so basically, if part of that is taken away, is that larger whole not the lesser? If the larger whole is lesser, then surely I'm lesser as well. So what this shows is like Damocles is bending reality to work in his favor. He's saying the bell tolls, Fabius, to indicate, you know, what he thinks he's saying is your time has come and I will be your vengeance. But anyone who knows the poem knows that's not what the poem is about. The bell tolls for thee means don't put off action because we are all affected by it. We are all affected by each of these, as if that wasn't explicit enough, or if that was too subtle an implication. If you go over to the journal notes where Fabius is he's basically figuring out whether or not he should rebel, whether or not his existing people are satisfied and served by the status quo. He knows now, because we've been following his progress in parallel. He knows that he knows of the werewolves and the wolf mage combination and experiments that are trying to push everyone, as all the people from the invading continent, away. He knows of the invaders and what forces they have and what they bring to bear, because he's obviously fighting them now in the present time. He knows that the town of Yoitsu was not served by these interests, much like the Confederacy didn't serve the interests of Marsara in the StarCraft 1 campaign. And so he is there making the decision to rebel. And he even says, I've reached out to the clergy, to the kings, to the generals. I have tried to contact all of these people and go through all legal recourses to make them realize what the threat is. And he's not doing like some Medivh from the beginning of Warcraft 3 where he's like, something terrible and ominous is happening. Like he's not doing that. He's deliberately finding the people who have the power, who can make the decisions, who can make something happen to change what has happened, and every single step he's being turned away and told no. And so eventually, in exasperation, Fabius shows that he is someone who truly understands the poem. He says, can they not see that we are each a part of the main? A part of the main is one of the lines, is a subsection of a line in John Donne's very famous poem. It is explicit then that he sees the problem that he has, is the problem his realm has, is the problem that his country has, and that his country needs to solve the problem. And if no one else will solve the problem, Fabius's hubris is that he believes he can solve the problem. Damocles just sees it as, I'm going to institute my revenge. He has a smaller mind. He has not accepted that we are each a part of the main. He was nominally focused on the realm and how it affected him, but then he was a little bit less affected by the people in the sanctuary. And now for Fabius, for him, Fabius is personal. Fabius locked him up. Fabius took away the things that he wanted. He wants revenge on Fabius. He doesn't want to solve the problems that are behind the scenes that indicate or explain the actions of Fabius. What's interesting about all of this, and we'll get into this in Mission 4, is that part of the creative understanding that I brought to this is something that has taken... I didn't have this phrase in mind at the time that I made the story, but it was something I was working through personally, and it's as follows. This is a very simple idea. It has extremely far-reaching implications. Understanding is not acceptance. I think that is extremely relevant. It is something that is not something that is incorporated as fact or as reality or taken on board, not nearly enough inside of what I perceive as the current cultural landscape, which is as follows. Understanding someone means that you have enough. You can expand your mind, your viewpoint, your horizons. You have enough compassion for the other individual as a sentient being to think logically and understand that there are points that move from A to B to C that didn't make that person do it, whatever they did or whatever they said, or take that path in life. But you have compassionate understanding for it. Acceptance is whether or not you believe that what they did is justified or want it to exist in a moral capacity. So we're going to use we're going to use a ridiculous real-life example, and then we'll use this. Let's say we'll use an example that's understandable and acceptable. We'll try this. Here's a moral gray area. You have a bike. It is one of your favorite and few possessions. Your family can't afford bills, so they sell your bike to get the money from it to help pay bills. You go steal your bike back because they never told you they were selling your bike and it's your bike. You can understand why a young person would go steal their bike back because it was their bike. And we should have compassion for the fact that it was their bike and it was taken from them, not by means that seem unfair, particularly if this person's a minor. And it seems that they were the one that was wronged, and so that they want to correct the wrong. And the way that they correct the wrong is by getting back the thing of theirs that to them was stolen. We can have understanding and compassion for that individual and that set of circumstances. Whether or not we accept it, whether or not we say we want a society where morally it is acceptable for the individual to go steal something back that has been stolen from them, is an entirely different debate. We can see how we can have understanding without having, and compassion that generates that understanding without accepting it, without wanting to incorporate it into broader society. This is actually a difference of understanding and acceptance, fundamentally, between Damocles and Fabius. Damocles does not understand Fabius. He does not understand anything about what Fabius is doing. Nor does he accept Fabius's actions on a moral, pragmatic, on anything level. He neither understands nor accepts. Fabius, on the other hand, understands. We can have understanding for the actions that Fabius has taken as a player. Whether or not it's acceptable is up to the player themselves to decide. We as the player understand Domicles' actions, and because we are put in the position of protagonist, we are encouraged to accept his actions because we are the ones making them happen. Therefore, his actions are our actions, so we understand him as a character, and we accept his actions by the implication that we're the ones who do it. Now, Fabius as an individual, as a character, he understands Damocles. He does. Like, he's got it. He accepts what he's doing, but still doesn't want. He understands but does not accept. There we go. Damocles neither understands nor accepts Fabius. Fabius understands but does not accept what Damocles is doing. Because to Fabius, again, let's go back into Mission 3. Mission 3, your goal is to destroy the two knights that are in charge of the treasonous forces and the invasive forces. Notice the hover text that's said by both of them. The treasonous knight says, "You cannot stop what is inevitable." On its surface, without any of this explanation, without any of this digging, we can believe that you cannot stop what is inevitable is his typical, like, I am the leader and I will crush you and there's nothing you can do, get wrecked, no, but you cannot stop me, I'm a boss. And he is a boss, he's got a ridiculous amount of health and he has better upgrades than you do, almost certainly, and he's like really, really tanky and it's like a truck, like you're going to need some units to deal with this guy. So it can sound like just braggadocious, I'm going to beat you words. But that's not what it is. You cannot stop what is inevitable. The invasive force is being chased out by something. They're being kicked away by something. They are running from something. And so you cannot stop what is inevitable. In the context of the knight, it's not actually meant that the knight is saying, I'm going to stomp you. It's whether you beat me or not, you're not ready for what's coming, dude. And what's interesting is that, again, Damocles' lack of, his ignorance, his lack of willingness to understand is put on full display by the treasonous knight. The treasonous knight says something that makes so much, it has so much understanding behind it. He says something like, you would sacrifice us all for your revenge. What a curious choice of words. You would sacrifice us all for your revenge. Well, at the level that Damocles, the character, understands what's going on, that sentence makes no sense whatsoever. You would sacrifice us all. You mean I would kill all of you for my revenge? I mean, that doesn't really make sense considering that, unless his goal is, I just hate Fabius. It doesn't really make sense if his goal is to help the people, and he's killing his own countrymen. You would sacrifice us all for your own revenge. I mean, we go back to, can they not see we are each a part of the main, Fabius's journal. This treasonous knight is referencing that you would sacrifice all of us for your revenge. All of us, to include you, for your revenge against Fabius. And the motivation for this line actually came from something that was very, very smartly said, I think, again in the StarCraft original campaign. by Arcturus Manx. No, it's in StarCraft 2. It's one of the few, I believe it's in StarCraft 2. It's one of the few lines in StarCraft 2's story where I was like, oh, that's good. Like, that's compelling, that's thought-provoking. Like, that gives, like, a fire. There's something good about this. Like, this is, like, just like superior, of impeccable taste and quality, and just, it's so good. So, and Wings of Liberty, I believe it is. Arcturus Manx has a line where he says something to the effect of, I don't understand why James Raynor is going through his rebellion right now when all of humanity has problems and he needs to suck it up because his problems aren't bigger than humanity's problems. Now, obviously, that was done in the context of StarCraft 2's desire to say something about the media and how its portrayal of leadership or its anti-portrayal of leadership and like the role that it plays vis-a-vis leadership. But I thought that was a very shrewd point. James Raynor does want revenge on Arcturus Manx. He has plenty of reason to want revenge on Arcturus Manx. Arcturus killed his girlfriend, or the person that he had fancied, betrayed all the people that fought for him, left entire nations and planets to rot and to die, used psi emitters to lure alien species to kill the people that, he wanted his own personal revenge on. But even doing all of that, all of the efforts that James Raynor does to destabilize the it's not the Confederacy, the Dominion. All the efforts that James Raynor makes to destabilize the Dominion, are they really a good idea when there's giant Protoss war fleets that are still glassing planets and literally billions of Zerg flooding out of the Char system, like doing everything they can to wipe everything and everyone off the face of the entire Earth? Is his time really best spent backstabbing like this one political opponent who caused him personal heartache? And I thought, that's really interesting. And so the Treasonous Knight in Mission 3 said the exact same thing. You're willing to, subjugate. You're willing to let us be subjugated by invaders or overcome by the thing that they're fleeing, just so that you can beat Fabius. How is that right? How is that moral? And again, when we see that, Domicles doesn't understand his own use of the poem, but Fabius shows a broader understanding. This Treasonous Knight shows a broader understanding. The Treasonous Knight is the hero of his own story. Surely Domicles is the hero of his own story. And so that's there were some other influences that went into Mission 3, which was fighting. Fighting is one thing and death is another. And it's very, very bad. Very bad is a strange word. It's very hard seeing people injured or crippled as a result of fighting. Not fighting, but as a result of war. We'll just say it flat out. It's not... one way of saying it has been, war is not glorious. There are just... You see people that have injuries that don't heal physically, and some that don't heal beyond physically. And, even though Little War Game is a real-time strategy game where you are making armies and you are having them fight other units, etc., I wanted to indicate that this isn't as, with all of the damaged workers and villagers, this isn't as simple as army v army, okay, we're just going to go ahead and fight, and that's going to be the end of it. There are... Even though they're little NPC, to you, their opponent or NPC are neutral characters. Some of them are just villagers lying on their side. That doesn't seem to be very much. But they're just lying on their side unblinkingly. Are they dead? Are they just barely alive? Are they comatose? You have the option of being a real monster and just trying to attack those, even though they're not doing you any harm and they can do no one any harm. But I wanted to indicate that there are consequences for what Fabius, for what Damocles, and for what the invaders are doing. They just all believe that they're justified in doing it. But whether or not it is, the price is being paid out by somebody. The ground is a little bit wrecked. There are hastily constructed tents everywhere and hastily dug graves. You know, there are like little outposts and people fighting across the entire map. It's not easy, basically. It's not that simple. And I didn't want to go too deep into that because there is a little bit more of that hint given in the final mission in Placeholder Map 4. But nevertheless, it made everything in the mission feel like it came alive a little bit more. I thought that was very important. So we get to Mission 4. Mission 4 is spawned by an absolute love. When I was in middle school, I absolutely loved Castle Warfare. In fact, the first board game I ever made came after I read many, like I read a book about dozens of times, unironically, about Castle Warfare. It's so intriguing how Castle Warfare works. Castle Warfare is extremely laborious and difficult, and it's very easy to hold a castle against a superior army if they don't have appropriate tools. There are a bunch of things that make it difficult. One, the front gate is a nightmare to assault because you're getting dumped on constantly. Two, the side towers that you normally engage with sappers or the parapets that you attack, they're usually appropriately defended as well. There tends to be a field army. Once you get into the courtyard, there's like a murder circle, like a courtyard that has. You've seen it in Game of Thrones and in Lord of the Rings. Okay, you knocked down the portcullis. Like you broke down the gate, you went through the portcullis. Like everything is good. You've crossed the moat. Once you've done that, there's just tiers with archers aiming down, aiming out of slits, such that you have almost no choice but to just take the massive loss of human life to move forward and to manage and to struggle and to fight through that. So I wanted to make attacking the castle, Fabius's keep, difficult. There is a field army, so like your forces have sat for the winter and you've recovered from Mission 3, from the mountains. Or from the Winterland. Come spring, you want to re-engage in the campaign and fight. You're on the bottom right-hand corner of the map. There is still a standing army with standing fortifications on the field. You have to wipe out all of those. There are a number of workers, and in fact, early on in the mission, there is a priest. And you can tell that Domicles has gone kind of, not off the rails, he's not crazy, but revenge is certainly more and more foremost in his mind, because he says, his quote is, "The time for words has ended." I mean, the time for words, according to Damocles, had ended when he was in prison. But what's interesting is that he seems to extend this to, there will be no peace, there will be no quarter, and I will have the revenge that I seek. This is my goal. This is what I have wanted to do. This is what I've been questing for, essentially, and it will be made manifest in reality. I will be the one that institutes this. And there's no time for words. There's no time to, what is I was reminded of, I made this line based off of, is it Wesley Snipes? No. I forgot what the character's name is. But the Dread Pirate Roberts, I believe that's the correct name, from Princess Bride. At one point he is captured, and the person who is his captor says, "Oh, we will get you to your ship." And the Dread Pirate Roberts just looks at him and says, "We are men of action. Lies do not become those such as us." Translation, your actions matter. Don't use words. Don't mingle around words. Do what you're going to do. We both know what it is. And so that's the way that Damocles is looking at this. I will do what I have to do, and I know what it is. Now, he meets a priest, and the priest tells him, "Look, I understand what you want to do. Look at there are two ramparts to the left and to the right, like two towers to the left and to the right. One disables the main keep door. The other one disables the invisibility of the keep's watchtowers. Whatever you have to do, just get this done with. Like, you're already here. There's been so much bloodshed, and this is why a priest of the church is saying it. Remember, you rescued all those workers from sanctuaries in Mission 2. So having a priest with a church indicates two things. One, you can now build priests out of the church. It will lend you help to some extent. But secondly, last time you saw a building like this, you were saving units. Now you're specifically going out of your way to destroy absolutely everything that you run across. Do what you have to do and then be done with this. End this bloodshed. And Domicles' words are quite harsh when he says, do not plead for the traitor's life, or you wish my mercy had been spent on you instead. This shows Damocles does not care. He is about revenge at this point. He is too far along to be stopped. He will not be stopped, not even by people who are well-meaning. He will not be tricked by fancy words. There's only one action, and the end of the action is Fabius's life, his head on a stick. That's the only thing that will satisfy Damocles. So he wipes out all of the forces on the left-hand side. You have your choice of how you want to go through. Castle warfare is very rarely accomplished by just sieging the front until everything dies. In fact, you can do that now in Placeholder Map 4, as we saw in Pekka's Speedrun. You didn't used to be able to do that, because there were literally catapults up on that ledge previously. And the problem was, that made it really, really difficult for newer players, like sub-30 APM, to actually beat the mission. So I was willing to take a hit to the realism of Castle Warfare in order to go ahead and do that. It might actually be the case that it means it's easier to assault the main gate than to attack the sides, but that's neither here nor there. You can slip in with the strike force, you can crash the main gate, you can bring down the main gate and then rush in. You can do whatever you want to. We get it. After you get past the courtyard, there are a couple of items that are left of notice. The first is going to be the upper left-hand room. There are priests, houses, and I think a tower, but maybe not, and a bunch of workers. The priest is deliberately there to bring a callback to the priest earlier in the mission, who says, do what you must, please spare the people, do what must be done, and then be about it. Be done with it. You have the option of killing all of those people. In traditional castle warfare, the peasants would go out, that were out in the field, when the invading army or the engaged army was nearby, would go ahead and bring themselves into the castle to a place of safety. Or they would be sent out by the king and by a fortress, not by the people in charge of the fortress, etc. But normally what would happen is they would go inside of the castle for safety, because it's safer to be inside those walls. And if you look at Placeholder Map 4, that castle is enormous. It is gigantic. It is huge. They're all tucked away in an upper left-hand corner, away from army production, away from other army units. They are by priests that are necessary to heal them and shepherd them and save them. And again, they're by these church-like buildings that you saw in the Waterwoods. But if you truly believe the time for words ended, nothing will stop the player, and there are no consequences to the player for killing all of those people. I believe in a thing there's a TV trope called video game cruelty potential. And I do believe that people are what they are in the dark. And so if you deliberately want to go ahead and kill those people, I will not stop you from doing it. And if you deliberately want to go about not doing it, I will not encourage you to save them either. It is very much your story. All the map design in all of these missions, with the exception of the first mission, but there are some examples there. Fundamentally, it's your story. How you want to engage through it is up to you. Most maps can be beaten quickly because they can be beaten in multiple ways. That is entirely up to you. So, however you get into the castle and you get up there, whether you save those people or not, there's another item in the middle left-hand portion of the map. It is the treasure room. It can only be activated by hitting it with a catapult that Q-fires onto a switch. Very interesting. When you get there, you see the bombshell that I've been building up and telling you explicitly in the story for the entire time. But it's this. The person who wrote all of the journal entries is Fabius. Fabius is a person from the Oitsu. He is a person who was a fresh-faced individual who just wanted to do right and moved out into the world with that understanding. Now, if you're reading this as Domicles, you could say, who cares? That just means it was filled with lies the entire time. Look how far this individual has fallen. If you put together the story that I have carefully laid out here, or you picked up bits and pieces of it and were curious and kind of pieced some things together yourself, what you realize is, Damocles' story is very similar. Before the events of the campaign, Domicles is just another paladin. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, kudos for him, but there's a thing in story writing called arrive late, leave early, which says that character better show up the instant they can do something interesting. Don't have them wait around. And then as soon as their purpose is done, I don't care if it's realistic or not, get them out of there. Like, make characters show up to do the things that they need to do, and then bam, they're gone, that's it. And so, the whole purpose is, the campaign didn't really, like, the world of Damocles didn't really start or change into anything beyond normal until Fabius imprisoned him. And the world of Fabius started as soon as Fabius set off into the world. And so it just makes you wonder, like, is Fabius actually the villain? Like, his methods are cruel and he certainly harmed the player, but are they actually all that wrong? And that leads into the Fabius fight itself. You have done everything. You have returned from imprisonment, raised an army, defended against multiple other armies, cleared the army from his field, and now are assaulting the keep, and you go into the room. And Fabius is there as Fabius, Lord of the Keep. What's important there is that he is the Lord of the Keep. He is not just the traitor. He is the person who is in charge of this area. Everyone around him has been fighting till the death. He had an entire army that was fighting for him when he wasn't even there in mission number 3. He is truly the person who has been accepted by this keep and by its forces for some reason or another. Notice also what Fabius says. His quote is very interesting. I believe it's one of the most egomaniacal things that you could possibly say. But it should cause the player some pause, because you will be fighting Fabius for a while. He has high armor, HP regeneration, and if you don't cheese him by some of the means that Pekka showed off, it is extremely, extremely difficult to take him down in a quick, bursty kind of way. He will enrage, and he will go invisible, and he will do all of these other things. But we'll get into the boss aspect of Fabius in a second. His quote is, "History shall vindicate me." When I came up with that line, I actually got chills, because I don't know where it came from, but it perfectly encapsulated all the things I was slowly building in, because I hate two-dimensional flat characters. I don't like them. I have tried to bring to any unit that speaks some kind of spark of life, some kind of like unique quirk to them, even if their purpose is just to like fill in some background story or something like that. Like, Domicles doesn't say very much, but he has a couple of lines where he is speaking courtesy of hover text, or his quotes give you an idea of what his personality is like. The Treasonous Knight and the Invader Knight gave some idea of what their personality was like, and to some extent what their take on the situation was. They were an individual, they were a plot device, but they're also an individual. Fabius has only one speaking line that isn't a journal entry or some other text, or the eulogy in the Yoitsu, and he just says, "History shall vindicate me." He truly believes that everything he has done is right. Maybe not morally right, maybe not everything was actually correct morally to do, but that history shall vindicate me, meaning that overall his actions had merit and should be done. Everything. Killing out, like, if we go over the things that he's done, imprisoning Damocles. Yes and no. Damocles didn't do anything wrong to Fabius specifically, but there is an indication that Fabius reached out to everyone who had some power to change things, and he couldn't get them changed. And then he cleaned off the influence of the wolf mages and the experiments in the Waterwoods. He has raised an army in Mission 3. We see it fighting against the Invader Knights. We see that he is cognizant of the threats beyond the realm. He has done all of these things, and only now, when he is going almost certainly to lose, you have busted into the throne room of Fabius, his chances of winning and this protracted engagement are gone. He is going to lose. It's just a matter of how and when. But his only words are, "History shall vindicate me," not to plead for his life, not to beg that something be made differently, not to, hope that you do something differently. He doesn't stand and pause and do anything, any like time for words or anything like that. He also understands that the time for words is ended. He just believes that he will be proven right over the long history. So the final thing is, why did I make Fabius a boss fight? Little War Game is a real-time strategy game, and real-time strategy games are, most of real-time strategy games. I come from a StarCraft background, as may be obvious by all of these examples, but also from Age of Empires. Age of Empires and StarCraft tend to have very similar mission structures. They have a melee map structure of wait X amount of time against overwhelming forces, or destroy everything, wait X amount of time, or destroy everything on the map, or destroy this specific thing. So the end of this map is destroy a specific thing. It's destroy Fabius, Lord of the Keep, kill him. But the way that you do that in other RTS games always felt unsatisfying. So for instance, at the end of the StarCraft campaign, you can just cast 2 nukes over top of where the Overmind is and kill it without sending in a bunch of forces in a death spiral of fire and war. It's very unsatisfying to go through. I think it's literally 5,000 hit points with just battlecruisers going pew 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 with no units firing back at it, and you're just like shooting the Overmind for 30 seconds. That's not engaging. That's not an exciting rush end. One of the missions that I thought ended quite successfully, was quite good, was I liked the end of the Wings of Liberty campaign, where you're up against overwhelming forces. You have a couple of ways using the Zalaga artifact to kick back some of these Zerg forces, but overwhelmingly, they are overwhelming. And you will lose to them eventually. You just have to make sure that eventually is exactly 1 second after the timer runs out. The problem is that I don't like those kind of survival missions because they tend to encourage things like we saw in the Warcraft 3 campaign. In the Warcraft 3 campaign, the last mission of the Night Elf campaign is the end of the normal Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos campaign, and it is against the Undead and Archelon. They will slowly push up the map. There is nothing that you can do to reverse the progress that they have made, barring, of course, cheesing them. And since that's the case, all you have to do is survive. And the problem is that just survive tends to encourage you to have, it tends to mean that the way that the player wins isn't the way so you want the player to feel an increasing sense of desperation and effort as the game gets closer and closer to ending, because you want them to hit an emotional climax. But so the Overmind example, where you just shoot it to death after you've cleared out the defenders, fails on that account for me. You do get it from the survival standpoint. The problem with the survival standpoint is that surviving isn't really a win con that makes the player feel good about themselves. Like when I beat Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos and I stop Archimon from even getting to Thrall's base, even taking over Thrall's base, I don't feel like I've won. I feel like, well, I guess that happened. Yeah, there's rising escalation and tension, but I don't win. The game wins via cutscene. That's horribly uninteresting to me. And so I thought, how about I just take on the challenge of making a boss? Particularly, this is in the earlier time of Little War Game where scripting, autocasting, etc., wasn't as widely known or disseminated or powerful, or there just weren't as many people trying to do it. And I thought, I'm going to go ahead and make a boss that in a real-time strategy game, army has to deal with. And so Fabius is an absolute monster. He is way stronger than any other individual in the game, and you are heavily encouraged to use micro to defeat him. If you bring enough forces, I guess you could just A-move him, but he has a lot of abilities that reposition your army and make him invisible and cause all sorts of other problems that you just can't quite fix and adjust and deal with easily. And so it encourages you to have more and more micro, more and more focus and attention as you get closer and closer to killing Fabius, Lord of the Keep. Let's get to the end of the Little War Game campaign, story and influences. What happens after you kill Fabius? Regardless of what shape the next campaign will make and will take, I have no intention of, at present, taking the Paladin Domicles perspective and finding out what goes on from there. Damocles' story is Even if his story is not over in terms of he'll have involvement in other plots, although that is not planned at this point. His story, as an individual character, is over. He was kicked into the plot by Fabius, and now he has ended the plot by ending Fabius. Fabius's influence is meant to indicate that things are happening in the background, and will give context perhaps for future campaigns, but I don't want to do a prequel where we go back in and make explicit all the things that happened to Fabius. His story too has ended, and so what happens to the wider world of the campaign? Do the invaders, do the things from across the sea, stay there, and the invading army comes and kicks Domicles' rear? Does Damocles manage to find a way to hold out against both of them, Fire Emblem Awakening style? I don't truly know. And that is a matter of speculation even for me. I'm now enough removed from the creative process that, I believe in, there's a concept in TV tropes called Word of God, and it's not literally the words of the words of a supreme being, but the idea is this is canon. This is the thing that is true in the context of the story, and that's it. So what I'm going to say about what happens after Damocles kills Fabius is shrug of God. I don't genuinely know what happens. And I'm going to paraphrase something that C.S. Lewis said here. C.S. Lewis, after writing the Screwtape Letters, said that he had an idea for a sequel in which instead of a demon or a devil sitting on someone's shoulder, tempting them to vices, and imagining what hell looks like as a bureaucracy, he said that he wanted to do something where, in reverse, there is an angel or some kind of angelic being that was beneficial to the person and a representation of heaven. That he didn't feel that he was up to that challenge. He didn't feel that he was up to that skill. It also reminds me of what C.S. Lewis said at the end of the 7th Narnia book, where he says the story of a very particular spoiler-laden character. The story of that person is very involved, and I would love very much to read it. But I'm not the person who is writing that story, so perhaps one of you can. And I think that's where I'm going to leave off in the ultimate answer. I'm going to borrow the wisdom of C.S. Lewis here. If anyone knows what happens definitively to Damocles after Fabius is taken care of, I will leave it to them to write that story, for perhaps it is not one that I am capable of writing, but at present it certainly isn't one that I intend to write.